Yeah, Andy.
Are you asking public bodies in Greater Manchester to adopt this Hillsborough Charter because you fear that they're holding things back from you in this inquiry?
Do you want to put that question to me or to both of us?
Right. Do you want to kick off, Andy?
Well, no is the straightforward answer to the question. But I just want to be absolutely sure, openly so, that all public bodies, and I've obviously talked to them individually about the review and their engagement with the review, that their cooperation, as I said, is the fullest possible. Experience shows that establishing the truth as quickly as you can and answering the questions that they have is the best way to facilitate the grieving process. It is good practice, and it's about asking them to consider that wider public interest rather than any internal considerations. I just want that issue put beyond any doubt at the very start of this process. It's about getting off on the right foot. It's about saying to everybody, look, the families and those injured do come first, and you must think about them in everything that you do and in the way that you interact with the panel.
We've had full cooperation from the agencies, and I think they genuinely themselves want to get to the truth of what happened and learn the lessons, both good and bad. So I wouldn't in any sense say this has been driven by a concern about their behaviour. But we felt they were very powerful principles. And when we talked to Bishop Jones, we felt they were very relevant to Manchester and would give further assurance to families that this would be handled in a very robust and open and thorough way.
Simon.
Simon Isher, Channel 4 News. Your report says nothing about what you found out so far. Can you expand a bit on what you have found out from talking to all of these families? And you don't mention how many members of the emergency services you've spoken to or how high up you've gone yet.
Yes, let me deal with those two questions separately. We haven't deliberately at this stage given findings because we're going to reflect on the interviews we've had, and the response has been such that that process has taken longer than originally planned. So we have done pretty much all the interviews now. We are still, even from today, getting requests for people to talk to us, and we want to then do that reflection before we reach definitive views. What we can say already, though, is that the preparations in Manchester were quite significant, and that was a beneficial thing in Manchester. We can say there was a very powerful civic response, but we can also say that there were issues about communication, and which were critical, both between the different services and between the services and the public.
Things went wrong, didn't they?
But there are certainly things that didn't go in the way that people would have wanted. That is clear, alongside the things that went well. And those are the things we will pick up and cover in our report. I won't prejudge the findings, but that will clearly be a focus. And as I said earlier, in our report, we want to try and answer the questions that the public and the families have raised. On your second point, we've made reference in the report to the number of individual interviews we've had, 70 or so. Many of those have been with the agency services. And in fact, they've been at all levels. So we've talked to the most senior people, and we've talked to frontline staff, both individually and in groups. So there has been an opportunity, both directly and through the NSPCC, for as many people as possible at all levels to give their views.
Just to add, Simon, I mean, of course, this is a difficult process, difficult for the individual services concerned. But we're just sending the signal from the very outset that we want them to be as open and honest as possible. And that's why we've asked them all to sign up.
Oh, yes.
Exactly, without fingers being pointed, you know, in those moments, you know, plans have been prepared in advance, but in those moments, you know, instincts take over. It's a difficult situation, as we all know. So this isn't about in any way pointing fingers. This is about looking at what was good, learning from what could have been better, and making Greater Manchester safer as a result.
And it's just, I would add one point, which is that in the interviews I've been involved in, and in the feedback I've had from my colleagues, people have told it as it was, as they saw it. There's been no sense I've had that they've tried to in any way tell it as we might want to hear it.
Excuse me.
Mark Carthy, Sky News. In terms of your criticism of the media, I wonder if you could sort of quantify for us the extent of your concern. Was it just sort of one or two examples of clumsiness? Was it hostility? And how far do you want to take this? I mean, is it something that is so serious that you think, for example, it should be dealt with by part 2 of the Leveson inquiry? Or is it something that you would be content to sort of leave as an issue raised by your review and nothing more?
I think it's important to put it in context. As I said right at the start, there's been a lot of the media that have handled the families affected in a very respectful way. We're not suggesting that every family had bad experiences, but enough of them raised the issue with us for us to feel that it was an important one for us to explore further and to comment on. That's why we've done it. It's come out of what families have said to us, and I think, Andy, you've had similar sorts of messages as well. And what we will start from is, in a sense, what sort of behaviour should you see in these situations? And could you have a similar expectation of a code, or whatever the right word is here, about the behaviour of the media? How that sits with part 2 of Leveson, and that was debated, as you know, in the Lords this week, is a entirely separate issue, really. I don't think it's for us to go into that territory at this stage. We really just want to understand the issue better and to form a view about how it might be dealt with in the future.
I think just to add, everyone's got a job to do, and we all understand that. And as Bob said, I mean, the response of the media was in many ways extremely responsible and positive in the events in the days afterwards. But I think it is fair to say that in the course of doing their job, everybody should be prepared to hear feedback, and particularly feedback from those most affected. So I just think that's a right and proper process, so that everybody may then take cognizance of that in the future in terms of how they go about their work.
You would have no doubt heard the account from Stuart Murray this morning, and I think anybody hearing that, any ordinary person, would reflect on whether that is acceptable thing to have happened. It's more than clumsy. I think it's quite significant.
Jennifer.
Just to follow up on the question about findings, I wondered whether any kind of clearer picture had emerged about why there was such a delay in the fire service going into the building on the night. And just to be a bit more specific about your interviews, have you interviewed the Chief Constable and the County Fire Officer as part of your interview so far? Yeah, sure.
On the first question, we do think we have a better understanding of what happened. I'd like not to comment at this stage until we've done the report, because I'd be giving you a comment on one particular aspect, but we have obviously looked at that issue in some depth and talked to all of the individual affected. And on your second point, yes, I have personally spoken to both the Chief Fire Officer and the Chief Constable and had an interview with them. Yep.
Will the role of social media as a whole, away from how the media reacted to it, be considered in this? So, for example, there was a lot of conflicting reports, and obviously the general public were in this high-profile event, and everything blew up on social media within seconds. Will that be considered in the response to the attack?
I think the role of social media will be something we will comment on, but in a sense what we're more interested in is how others reacted to it. How did it change the pattern of events? How did the media respond to it? How did the agencies respond? And what does it change about the way you need to communicate as public bodies? I think that's more of a focus for us, because it's clear that events happen on social media extraordinarily fast, and sometimes they accurately reflect the picture and sometimes they don't. And the question is, how do the public services who are working to a different speed deal with that, really, is, I think, quite an important issue.
I think just to be a bit more explicit about that, I've met many of the families now, and there was a concern about how images that appeared on social media were picked up by the mainstream media, and that's an issue that I had subsequently raised with certain outlets that were publishing images that came from that way, particularly images that were particularly distressing to one of the families. There was the question of leaked material in the United States, which also appeared in the media. So there's the question about that and the propriety of that. But then there's the third question around direct contact with families. So
Yeah,
I
it's
think
all
you
of the
know,
above.
nobody is wanting to kind of, as I said, everyone's got a job to do. But I think it is right and proper for all of us, having lived through what we lived through last year, to kind of hear how it felt to be those most affected,
Yeah,
and then to perhaps consider how we do our jobs accordingly.
I think that's the key point. Social media is a reality, really. It's how we respond to it that's important.
Simon? Sorry, it was a colleague. I'll come back to you, Simon.
Doesn't though the fact that some families actually contacted the media for help finding their loved ones highlight the complete incompetence of those public bodies who should have been keeping those families informed?
I think that would be a very harsh judgment. I think the public bodies did what they could to keep families informed, and obviously we will comment on that in our report about the communication, as I referred to earlier. So I'm not in any sense saying that contact with the media was something you would have not expected to happen. Of course it did happen and should have happened. But there will be lessons for the public bodies about how they could communicate better, and that will be in our report, and quicker. And there will be lessons for the media about how they treat families affected.
Yeah, Judith.
I know you've worked closely with both the Hillsborough families and now with the Manchester families. What similarities are you seeing? Because it sounds as though what you're saying at this point, 30 years nearly after Hillsborough, is that we're still in a situation where victims, those bereaved, are not put first by public organisations, and that's something that still needs to be driven home.
Well, I think Bishop James Jones' report was incredibly powerful on this point, that what happened 30 years ago or so is still, in many cases, there are echoes of it still today, and we've seen that possibly with Grenfell. And it's an instinct, isn't it, maybe to kind of look internally into internal issues before telling the wider truth about what happened, and that tension is always there. And I think the power of Bishop James' report is that he asks bodies to sign up to give confidence to those within to work openly and honestly in establishing the truth, because we know from experience that is the best way to help families most affected, without leaving them searching for answers later down the line. So as Lord Kerslake said, these are very different events, but the principles do hold across all of those different public tragedies, and we just think it's a good, we've been through that process with learning from the past. So having done that, it is right actually now to apply it to the now and to the future, and to make sure we get better as a country in supporting people who've been through these traumatic events. And
I would say lessons have been learned, and I think many of the families were fulsome in their response about how they were dealt with and supported by the services. So it's not suggesting, and we wouldn't want to suggest, there wasn't a lot that was done that was good, but there are more lessons to learn, and we should carry on learning in these circumstances.
Simon?
Are you intending to name names in your review? Publish people and their quotes? Name who did what and when?
We will clearly only publish quotes where families or others have given their agreement to those quotes going in. In some circumstances, you cannot avoid naming names because events related to those individuals, and where that's the case, we will do so. I mean, some of those are immediately obvious. People who were in senior positions will clearly have to be identified. But this isn't a report that's seeking to blame individuals here. It's about genuinely learning lessons. So where you have to name names in order to make sense of the story, we will do. But the interviews were given on the basis of confidentiality, and All of the interviews were given on the basis that we would not quote directly for people without their agreement, but, as I say, we will identify individuals where it's appropriate to do so.
Just add one more question. So you're saying that if the Chief Constable, for example, said I don't want you using my quote in your report, that would be what you agreed to?
Well, all the conversation started on the principle of saying these are interviews where we will talk to the individuals about referring to any quote they give. I think clearly, as I said earlier, where there are particular senior individuals who've been interviewed and there are things they have said, we will expect to be able to identify what their comment was in the report. But what I'm really trying to distinguish is between, let's say, individual firefighters and members of the public and families, and clearly senior people who did the interviews in different circumstances.
Okay, so I just want to, in closing, reiterate our thanks to you, Bob, and to all of the members of your panel for the time that you've devoted to this, and indeed for the thorough way in which you are going about your work. The full report is scheduled to be published by the end of March, so obviously that isn't very far away. And today, one of the purposes of today, of course, is to provide, as the Deputy Mayor said, that final reminder to people who perhaps haven't been able to come forward to come forward now. It is obviously a very tight timetable, but what we've got to balance here is giving people the time to ask the questions and to tell their experiences, with the need to learn as quickly as we possibly can, so that we're in the strongest position we can be going forward. So we're trying to get that balance right, and I think that the panel has helped us enormously in seeking to do that. So thank you all for coming this morning. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.